Hello friend, welcome to Stories by Tocci. We bring you interesting folk tales. Please don't forget to hit the like button, please share, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thank you for doing so. Now let's get into the story. The wind that morning carried the scent of freshly baked bread from Mrs. Lawrence's kiosk down the street, wrapping itself around Amelia as she stood by her front porch, sipping tea that had long gone cold. The town of Willow Heights was never in a hurry. Its rhythm was the kind you could time your heartbeat to, and Amelia liked it that way. Her home, a modest two-bedroom flat tucked into the edges of Alder Close, was quiet, too quiet for a woman whose thoughts now echoed against the walls. At 34, she carried herself with the kind of elegance that came not from wealth but from patience. Her husband, Ethan, a reserved IT consultant with eyes that rarely lingered and lips that only parted when necessary, had just left for another one of his client runs. She had kissed him goodbye, as always, out of habit rather than emotion. Their love wasn't loud. It never had been. It was the kind that whispered, not roared, a love that once made her feel safe, now made her feel unseen. Yet nothing had prepared her for what was to come. That morning, a call came through from Sandra, her best friend since university days. Sandra, always full of colors and chaos, had just returned from a business trip and insisted Amelia come over for lunch. "It's been too long, babe," Sandra had said, her voice tinged with a lightness Amelia no longer knew how to carry. She agreed, not out of excitement, but out of obligation, the same way one attends a church service on a sleepy Sunday because skipping feels wrong. As she dressed, Amelia hummed softly, hands brushing over a floral blouse Ethan once said made her look like peace. Funny how peace was now a thing of the past. The heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it? The scripture in Jeremiah echoed suddenly in her mind, though she hadn't been reading her Bible lately. Maybe the Spirit knew something she didn't. Yet. The drive to Sandra's apartment was uneventful, except for the nagging weight in Amelia's chest that refused to be named. Sandra had recently moved into a new flat, room 2B at Maple Estate, a quiet building with white walls and long staircases that smelled of paint and polish. Amelia had brought a small gift, a silk scarf from her last market trip, wrapped neatly with a card that read, "To more beginnings." The irony would hit her later like a slap from heaven. When she arrived, Sandra's laughter could already be heard from the kitchen. "Come in. I'm just finishing a call," Sandra shouted through the open door. Amelia smiled politely, slipped off her shoes, and walked into the familiar warmth of her friend's home. Framed photos lined the hallway, most of them from university days, where they wore innocence like perfume. She headed toward the kitchen, but stopped midway, remembering she needed the restroom. Sandra's apartment was still unfamiliar, so Amelia took the first left. The door was slightly ajar, and steam slithered out like a snake waking from slumber. That's when she saw him. Ethan. Her Ethan. Stepping out of the shower, towel clinging to his hips, droplets of water dancing across his chest like mocking angels. Their eyes met, and time betrayed them both. She didn't scream. She didn't speak. The silence that followed was heavier than betrayal. It was final. A silence only broken by Sandra's voice calling from the kitchen. "Do you want orange juice or Zobo?" Amelia's feet moved before her mind caught up, carrying her out of the apartment like a leaf caught in a reluctant breeze. The gift bag dropped somewhere between the corridor and her dignity. She didn't wait for Sandra. She didn't wait for Ethan. She walked past the gate, past the curious security guard, past everything familiar. Her car keys trembled in her hand as she got in, and for a moment she sat there, engine humming beneath her, heart howling inside her. Her hands were shaking, but no tears came. Not yet. Her phone lit up. Sandra calling. She turned it face down. Then Ethan called. She powered it off. "Be not deceived. God is not mocked. For whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap," she muttered, the words slipping from her lips like a curse and a prayer. She drove back home in a daze, her fingers gripping the steering wheel like it was the last thing keeping her from falling apart. At a red light, she glanced into the rearview mirror and didn't recognize the woman staring back. Her face was calm, too calm. It was the calm of a storm gathering its winds. She arrived home, placed her keys quietly on the shelf, and sat on the couch. Not to cry, not to think, just to be. The house was still, eerily still. She could hear the clock ticking, and for the first time in years, it sounded like it was mocking her. Evening came like a slow visitor with muddy feet, tracing shadows across her living room walls. Ethan returned just past 8, as expected. He walked in whistling, a habit he'd picked up recently. Amelia sat at the edge of the couch, the same way a judge might sit waiting for the accused. He leaned over to kiss her cheek, but she shifted subtly. He didn't seem to notice, or he pretended not to. "Work was long," he said, tossing his bag to the side and stretching. "How was your day?" She smiled, a smile with no roots. "Uneventful," she replied. She watched him move, watched how his lies wore skin, and walked. She wanted to ask 1,000 questions, but not tonight. Tonight, she would be water, silent, shapeless, patient. She knew what she saw. But she also knew Ethan. He was methodical, strategic. He would have a plan, but so would she. She climbed into bed that night without touching him, without even brushing against the threadbare truth between them. A time to keep silence, and a time to speak, Ecclesiastes whispered in her chest. This was the time for silence, but the time to speak would come. The days that followed moved like a procession of ghosts, quiet, unannounced, and heavy. Amelia woke up each morning with the burden of silence, the kind that seeps into the bones and makes every breath feel borrowed. Ethan remained his usual self, unchanged, unaffected, like a man who believed he had pulled off the greatest illusion. He spoke softly, moved predictably, laughed at the evening news, and kissed her forehead like nothing had shifted in the world they built together. But something had, something deep. Her thoughts were no longer gentle. They scratched at her like thorns, begging her to scream, but she held her peace. Not because she lacked the strength to confront him, but because she knew the storm must be chosen, not summoned in haste. One night, as he slipped into bed after his shower, she turned her back to him and stared at the wall, wondering how many times that same routine had played out in another woman's home. He that is unjust, let him be unjust still, and he which is filthy, let him be filthy still, echoed in her mind from Revelation, and it comforted her strangely. Ethan was a puzzle she no longer wished to solve, but she needed clarity. If she were to tear the curtain off his lies, she would do so with evidence, not emotion. Her phone, once a portal to mundane routines, became her lantern. She scanned old messages, searched bank alerts, even tracked his calendar app. Nothing. The man was as meticulous as a surgeon, but one error, one misplaced detail, was all she needed. And she found it, like a hidden thorn in a patch of silk, an Uber receipt, charged to their joint account, for a trip to Maple Estate, dated 2 weeks before the shower incident. It wasn't Sandra's party. It wasn't business. It was him, going back to a place he should have never known. The scripture came again, the eyes of the Lord are in every place, beholding the evil and the good. That verse from Proverbs pressed into her heart like a seal. She didn't confront him. Not yet. She became wind beneath doors, quiet, unnoticed, but present. Each day she smiled with calculated gentleness, prepared his tea, ironed his shirts, kissed his cheek when he left, then turned around and studied the shadows he left behind. There was no passion in her movements anymore, only purpose. She began visiting Sandra more often, not out of affection, but with the weariness of a woman dragging her cross to Golgotha. Sandra was unsettled, laughing too quickly, hugging too long, avoiding Amelia's eyes like they held a secret mirror. It didn't take long for Sandra to crack, though she didn't know she was doing it. In a moment of distracted chatter, she mentioned the necklace. "Daniel bought it," she said, smiling softly. Amelia froze. "Daniel?" she asked. "Yes, a friend," Sandra replied, eyes darting, voice betraying her. "Daniel." Amelia held the name like a loaded pistol. She asked nothing more. She let Sandra fumble through the rest of the conversation, then excused herself. Outside, she stood by her car, gripping the steering like it was the only thing anchoring her to the earth. The name rolled through her head like thunder across a plain. Daniel, a man Sandra loved, trusted, entertained, and Amelia knew with terrifying clarity that Daniel was Ethan, a chameleon with a double life, a man whose lies wore fresh names like cologne. "Surely your sin will find you out," she muttered, remembering numbers 32:23, and this time she smiled, not because she was amused, but because she now understood the battlefield. The war was not just about betrayal, it was about identity. Ethan hadn't just cheated, he had erased himself to become someone else. Amelia drove to the waterfront that evening, the place where she and Ethan had once celebrated their 4th anniversary. Back then, they'd sat on the bonnet of their car, watching the sky pour crimson into the lake, whispering dreams into the air like children building castles on clouds. That memory felt centuries old now, like a fairy tale someone else had lived. She parked and walked to the edge, letting the wind bite her cheeks, letting the truth settle like dust around her. The ache in her chest wasn't from betrayal anymore, it was from clarity. The kind of clarity that strips away hope and replaces it with cold resolve. "Be still and know that I am God," the verse said, and she obeyed, standing there for what felt like hours. Her mind wandered to Sandra, not with hatred, but with sorrow. How many lies had Ethan fed her? How much of herself had Sandra poured into a man who wasn't real? And yet the deeper question remained, how had Amelia missed it all? Had love made her blind? Or had she simply chosen not to see? The truth, she realized, was somewhere in between. Love doesn't blind, it covers. And sometimes it covers things not meant to be seen until the mask falls. She didn't cry. Her tears had dried in the corridors of Sandra's apartment that day. Now she was building something else. Not revenge, not bitterness. Just a new version of herself, one forged in silence, sharpened by truth. The next morning, Amelia returned to Sandra's apartment unannounced, holding a flash drive and a calmness that wasn't natural. Sandra opened the door in a silk robe, hair untamed, face washed in sleep. Her eyes widened with surprise, but softened when she saw Amelia. "Hey, what's up?" she asked, stepping aside. Amelia walked in, placed the flash drive on the center table, and turned to face her. "You need to see what's on it," she said simply. No emotion, no shaking voice, just facts. Sandra sat slowly, inserted the flash into her laptop, and clicked. Images, screenshots, a few surveillance grabs from Maple Estate lobby, dated weeks apart. One video, Ethan entering the compound, kissing her in the hallway. Sandra gasped, hand covering her mouth. "He told me his name was Daniel." "I didn't," she began. Amelia held up a hand. "I know. He lied to both of us." The silence that followed was thick and holy. Sandra's face crumbled, and she began to weep, not with guilt, but with confusion, shame, and disbelief. Amelia watched her, and for the first time in weeks, felt something like pity. "He created a whole person just to be with you," Amelia said softly. "He did the same with me. The only difference is, I gave him my vows." Sandra sobbed harder. Amelia stood, her voice steady. "I don't hate you, Sandra. I just need you to know the truth. So we can decide what comes next, not with lies, but with eyes wide open." She turned to leave. Sandra reached for her, but Amelia paused only to say, "No weapon formed against me shall prosper," then walked out, leaving the truth to sit in the room like a third guest neither of them had invited. The days that followed were no longer silent. They were heavy with truths unsaid, loaded with the weight of two women trying to understand the depth of one man's deception. Sandra stopped calling. She didn't need to. Her absence said enough. Amelia no longer visited. She didn't need Sandra's explanations or apologies. It wasn't about broken friendship anymore. It was about untangling herself from the web that Ethan had spun like a deceitful spider hiding in plain sight. She began to feel her strength again, not all at once, but in whispers. It came in the way she now looked Ethan in the eye when he spoke, no longer searching for sincerity. It came in the way she tucked her emotions into her pockets, carrying herself like a woman who had nothing left to lose and therefore everything to gain. One evening, as they sat in silence over dinner, Ethan looked up and asked, "You've been distant lately. Everything okay?" The audacity of that question made her throat tighten with restrained fury. But she smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes, and replied, "Just tired." And indeed, she was tired of pretending, tired of protecting the man who built a second life behind her back. She watched him eat, fork rising and falling like a metronome, completely unaware that the walls around him were starting to crumble. She didn't lash out. She didn't scream. Instead, she quietly planned, laying each piece of her next step like a chess player nearing checkmate. The prudent sees danger and hides himself, but the simple go on and suffer for it. She remembered from Proverbs, and it echoed in her heart like a quiet bell before dawn. In the middle of one of those nights where sleep was a stranger and memories became loud house guests, Amelia pulled out a box from the back of her wardrobe, an old keepsake trunk filled with letters, journals, and the early relics of her love story with Ethan. She read through them slowly, like someone studying the ruins of a collapsed cathedral. Each page, each photo, each scribbled promise felt like the ghost of a man she no longer recognized. Ethan had once written her a note that read, "You make silence feel like music." She had believed him. Oh, how she had believed. She traced the edges of that note and let the tears fall, not out of pain, but out of mourning. Mourning the woman she had been. The version of herself who trusted without hesitation, who loved without condition. That woman was gone. In her place stood someone reborn through fire, sharpened by betrayal. Yet, beneath all that strength was still a tenderness, one she feared would be mistaken for weakness again. Her phone buzzed, dragging her back into the present. A message from Sandra. "He's here. In my apartment." "Please come." Amelia read the words twice, then a third time. Her hands grew cold. She knew what this was. A trap? A confession? A goodbye? She didn't know. But she dressed slowly, deliberately. Not like a woman chasing a thief, but like a lawyer preparing for her final argument. "Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil," she whispered to herself, Psalm 23, comforting her not with peace, but with purpose. When she arrived at Sandra's apartment, the hallway felt longer than usual, like time had stretched it just to test her resolve. She knocked. No one answered. Then the door creaked open. It had been left unlocked. She stepped inside and was immediately struck by the stillness. No sound, no voices, just the hum of the refrigerator and the soft tick of the wall clock. Then she saw them. Sandra on the couch, arms folded tightly across her chest. Ethan sitting beside her, hunched forward, eyes dim. They looked like two people dragged into the storm, not knowing how to swim. Amelia didn't speak. She waited. Ethan rose slowly, as though standing under a burden that had finally become too much. "I owe you both," he began, his voice low, hollow. "Explanations. Apologies. The truth." Sandra didn't move. Her eyes were glassy. "Your truth is late," she whispered. Ethan turned to Amelia. I started with a lie I didn't plan to keep. I told her I was Daniel. I never thought it would become anything real." Amelia stood still, arms at her side. "You never thought you'd get caught," she corrected him. He nodded. "Yes," his voice cracked like glass under pressure. "You were both my escape from who I was failing to be." Amelia didn't blink. "So we were illusions to you?" she asked, tone quiet but slicing. "No," he said. "You were mirrors, and I ran from the reflections you showed me." It was the most honest thing he had said in years. Yet honesty, once overdue, no longer redeems. It merely explains. She looked at Sandra, who finally met her eyes. There was no anger there now. Just ruin. Shared ruin. "I came because you asked," Amelia said. "Now I'm leaving because I choose to." And with that, she turned around, footsteps light, heart heavier than ever, but no longer confused. That night, Amelia didn't go home. She checked into a modest guest house on the other side of Willow Heights, a place where no one knew her name, where the walls didn't carry echoes of broken trust. She lay on the bed, eyes open, staring at the ceiling like it held the answers. She thought of her mother, who once told her, "When you can't change the wind, learn to adjust your sail." That night, she adjusted. She opened her Bible, not out of ritual, but because her soul felt like a cracked jar that needed mending. Her fingers stopped at Isaiah 61 verse 3, "To give unto them beauty for ashes, the oil of joy for mourning, the garment of praise for the spirit of heaviness." It felt tailor-made for her. She breathed it in. Tomorrow, she would begin the paperwork. She didn't want revenge. She wanted release. The Ethan she loved didn't exist anymore. Maybe he never had. And Sandra, well, Sandra was just another casualty in a war none of them saw coming. Amelia wasn't bitter. She was awake, and that awareness was its own form of salvation. She lay there until dawn stretched its arms across the sky, and then she rose, not broken, not whole, but on her way. The sky that morning looked undecided, with clouds suspended like unspoken questions, and sunlight peeking only in whispers. Amelia sat by the window of the guest-house dining room, stirring her tea without drinking it, watching as the world moved on outside while her own remained paused. The silence inside her had shifted. It wasn't numbness anymore. It was precision. Every emotion she now felt had a name, a time, and a direction. There was no longer room for confusion. She had spent the previous night in prayer, not the loud, theatrical kind, but the kind where words melted into sighs, and sighs into surrender. She remembered whispering, "Lord, if you'll carry me, I'll walk." Her phone had remained untouched since the confrontation at Sandra's apartment. Messages had piled up from Ethan, ranging from explanations to confessions to desperate attempts to rewind time, but the clock no longer belonged to him. He had spent his years banking on her silence. What he hadn't counted on was that silence could evolve. It could become wisdom. It could grow into clarity. She stared at her reflection in the glass and barely recognized herself. There was something newer in her eyes, something neither bitterness nor sadness could touch. Maybe it was strength, or maybe it was detachment. Either way, it was unfamiliar but necessary. "Behold, I do a new thing. Now it shall spring forth. Shall ye not know it?" The words from Isaiah came to her, not as comfort, but as confirmation. Something new had indeed begun, and it wore her face now. Later that day, Amelia found herself standing at the entrance of a legal firm, tucked between a pharmacy and a tailor's shop in the quieter part of town. It was a place recommended by a friend who knew nothing about her situation, just that it was time for her to explore new beginnings. She walked in with the steadiness of someone who had counted the cost and was ready to pay. The receptionist greeted her with the kind of smile meant for strangers, and she appreciated that. There was something liberating about not being known. Within minutes, she was seated in a modest office, papers laid before her, questions asked in gentle tones. Do you want to proceed with the petition for divorce today, or would you prefer we draft a preliminary agreement? The lawyer asked, his voice calm but careful. Amelia looked down at the form, her fingers running over the legal jargon like they were sacred texts. It wasn't the document that made her chest tighten. It was what it represented. Not just the end of a marriage, but the burial of a version of herself that had waited too long for someone else's honesty. "Let's begin the petition," she replied, voice clear. "I don't want halfway healing." The lawyer nodded, already scribbling notes. The process began, signatures, affidavits, timelines. She left the office not with a sense of victory, but with peace. It was strange how sometimes the most courageous thing one could do was to walk away, not from someone else, but from the person you became while waiting for them to change. Wisdom is the principal thing, therefore get wisdom, and with all thy getting get understanding. Proverbs 4 verse 7 lingered in her mind, not as poetry, but as prophecy. That evening, as she returned to the guest house, she saw a familiar car parked outside. Ethan. Her steps slowed. There was no fear, just fatigue. She walked up to the reception and nodded at the attendant, who gestured toward the lounge. Ethan was seated, elbows on his knees, head bowed like a schoolboy waiting for punishment. He looked up when she entered, eyes red, face pale. "Amelia," he said, standing. She didn't ask how he found her. Men like Ethan always knew how to track what they couldn't protect. "I won't take your time," he began. I need you to hear me. Once." She sat across from him, arms folded. "I've written you an email," he continued, voice shaking. "I poured everything into it. Everything I didn't say. Everything I didn't know how to explain." She didn't respond. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small envelope. "And this is the necklace, the one I bought her. I'm giving it to you. Not because you want it, but because I need to let go of it." "You think confession is atonement," she said softly. "But it's not. Confession is just the beginning. Redemption is something else entirely." Ethan looked down, nodding slowly. "I know I broke you." She shook her head. "No, Ethan. You didn't break me. You broke the image you created. I survived." He looked up, and for the first time, there was no defense in his eyes, just emptiness. "I just wanted to be more than what I was," he said. "You should have tried being honest first," she replied. Then she stood and walked out without another word. As she stepped into the hallway, she whispered, "He healeth the broken in heart, and bindeth up their wounds," from Psalms, and with that, left behind the ghost of the man she once called husband. Night found her restless again, but not unsettled. She sat on the balcony of her guest-house room, legs tucked beneath her, watching the moonlight scatter across the street below. Her heart wasn't heavy, it was hollow, like a house that had been cleaned out, swept bare, waiting to be filled with new stories. She didn't know where her journey would take her next. She only knew that it wouldn't be backward. Sandra had messaged her once that afternoon, just one line. "I'm sorry for everything. I'll never forget your grace." Amelia didn't reply. Not because she held a grudge, but because some apologies don't need responses. They just need space. Her mother had always said, sometimes the door you shut becomes the gate to your peace. She understood that now more than ever. She picked up her Bible and read from Lamentations 3 verses 22 to 23. "It is of the Lord's mercies that we are not consumed, because his compassions fail not. They are new every morning." She closed the book and let the word settle. Yes, a new morning was coming, and this time it would not be built on blind trust or borrowed love. It would be hers, crafted from ashes, stitched with mercy, and sealed with resolve. The following week drifted in quietly, like a stranger tiptoeing across a sleeping house. Amelia extended her stay at the guest house, not because she didn't have anywhere to go, but because she didn't want to return to the life she had just walked away from. The air in her flat would smell like the past, like betrayal woven into the curtains, like disappointment soaked into the couch cushions. Here, though, in this rented quiet, she could breathe without memory pressing down on her chest. Mornings became her friend again. She woke up before the sun, not out of anxiety, but anticipation. She would sit by the window and watch how dawn spilled over rooftops like a promise kept. She began journaling again, pouring thoughts onto paper like water from a cracked jug. The more she wrote, the lighter she felt. Her words weren't laced with rage. They were filled with questions, with observations, with the kind of insight only pain can teach. She stopped responding to Ethan's messages entirely. What was left to say to a man who only found his voice when silence fell between them? She understood now that some men are not husbands, they are performances. And she had watched Ethan's act long enough. As the days bled into one another, she felt something shifting in her, not a sudden leap, but a quiet evolution. Her mind had begun to let go of what her heart had been gripping too tightly. Forget the former things. Do not dwell on the past, Isaiah 43 verse 18 said, and for once she didn't resist. She let the past stay where it belonged, behind her. One afternoon, while walking through the market for fruits and spices, she ran into Mrs. Udoka, her former neighbor from Alder Close. The older woman beamed with warm surprise. "Amelia, my daughter, it's been long, we miss seeing your gentle face around the compound." Amelia smiled politely, nodded, and tried to mask the ache behind her eyes. "I've been taking some time away," she said, choosing her words carefully. Mrs. Udoka leaned in, voice lowered but laced with curiosity. "And your husband?" "We haven't seen him either. He used to greet so well." That word, used, sat heavy in Amelia's ears. "He's around," she replied, offering no further explanation. Some stories didn't belong to everyone. She continued walking, her basket heavier than before. At the pepper stall, her thoughts tangled again with memory. There had been a time when she and Ethan would shop together, arguing over the ripeness of plantains, laughing over how bad he was at bargaining. Now, she couldn't recall the last time his laughter had been real. It had been a performance, part of the double life he had perfected. She passed a group of university students talking loudly about relationships, one of them declaring, "If a man cheats once, he'll do it again. Don't let your love turn you into a fool." Amelia didn't flinch. Not anymore. She was no longer ashamed of what had happened. Shame, she had learned, only belongs to those who have something to hide. Her pain had been public, yes. But her healing? That would be her private glory. As she paid for her goods and headed back toward the guest house, she repeated a line her grandmother once told her, "Even a broken pot can carry soup when the fire is right." And truly, her fire had come. That evening, she received a message that was both unexpected and oddly welcome. "Sandra." It read simply, "There's something I need to tell you. Can we talk?" Amelia stared at the screen for a long time. Her first instinct was to ignore it, but something deeper urged her not to. She replied with a time and location, neutral, public, safe. They met at a small park cafe near the train tracks, a place neither of them had memories in. Sandra looked thinner, her eyes sunken but honest. Amelia noticed she was no longer wearing makeup, like she, too, had stripped off the layers of performance. They sat down without a hug, without the small talk that usually bridges awkward silences. "He came to me," Sandra began. "Not to fight, not to beg, to apologize, but not for cheating, for lying to both of us." Amelia said nothing. Sandra continued. "He told me he never intended to love me. He was only trying to escape something in himself, and I let him." There it was, the bitter truth wrapped in soft surrender. "I wasn't innocent," Sandra said. "I asked questions I didn't want answers to. Deep down, I think I knew he wasn't who he said he was, but I liked the lie more than the truth." Amelia exhaled slowly. "I did that too," she said quietly. "We all make peace with illusions when the truth is too expensive. Sandra reached into her bag and handed over a small brown envelope. "This is everything he gave me. The necklace, the notes, the receipts. I don't want to burn them. I want you to have them, because they're part of your story, not mine." Amelia took the envelope, not out of interest, but because closure sometimes comes dressed as fragments. "To everything there is a season," she whispered. "This one ends here." As Amelia returned to her room later that night, she didn't open the envelope. She placed it at the bottom of her suitcase, beneath folded clothes and untold memories, not as a keepsake, but as a symbol, something that belonged to a version of her she no longer served. The lights in her room were soft, but her mind felt sharper than ever. She poured herself a glass of Zobo, sat at the table, and opened her journal. This time she didn't write about the past. She wrote about possibilities, about solo travel, about her long-abandoned art projects, about the kind of love that didn't need to be romantic to be fulfilling. She wrote down a verse that had been circling in her spirit all day. "For I know the plans I have for you, saith the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." From Jeremiah 29, verse 11. That night, for the first time in what felt like years, she didn't dream of Ethan. She dreamed of water, still, vast, unbothered. And she was swimming in it, not drowning, not reaching for rescue, just moving finally on her own. The final week of Amelia's stay at the guest house began with no fanfare, just the quiet drip of rain on the balcony railing and the occasional creak of the ceiling as the wind whispered overhead. She stood in front of the mirror, tying her scarf slowly, watching how the fabric kissed her collarbone like a familiar companion. She didn't feel new, not exactly, but she felt clean, like a slate wiped down after years of chalk and scribble. Her suitcase sat in the corner, half-packed, not because she was hesitant to leave, but because she now knew that healing wasn't a destination you raced to, it was a process you honored. There was no urgency in her movements anymore. The bitterness that once surged through her veins like wildfire had cooled into still water, deep and reflective. Outside, the town moved at its usual pace, vendors calling out prices, children skipping over puddles, life humming along in its unbothered rhythm. And in that ordinariness, Amelia found her strength. The kind that doesn't announce itself with clenched fists, but rather with an open palm. She thought about everything she had lost: trust, partnership, time, and yet she felt full. Not because she had replaced what was broken, but because she had reclaimed what was buried inside her. Her voice, her peace, her power. "Better is the end of a thing than the beginning thereof," she whispered from Ecclesiastes, then zipped her bag slowly, steady as a woman who no longer feared silence. Before leaving the guest house, Amelia walked to the nearby chapel, where an old groundskeeper often left the doors unlocked and a single candle burning by the altar. The chapel smelled of dust and reverence, of prayers both answered and abandoned. She took a seat in the third pew, her hands folded neatly on her lap, not in desperation, but in respect. The space was still, but not empty. It felt like sitting inside a held breath. She looked up at the wooden cross, worn smooth by years of longing and praise, and let the tears come, not sharp, not loud, but soft and steady like the tide returning to shore. They weren't tears for Ethan or for Sandra, or even for the marriage that had unraveled in her hands like dry thread. They were tears for every version of herself she had sacrificed in the name of loyalty, for every time she had swallowed her voice to keep the peace, for all the warning signs she'd explained away just to protect a man who had never protected her. "The Lord is near to the broken-hearted and saves the crushed in spirit," she recalled from Psalms, and for the first time, she believed it wasn't just poetic. It was promise. She didn't stay long. Just long enough to lay it all down, not as a burden, but as an offering. By the time she stood to leave, she wasn't lighter, but she was freer. And freedom, she now understood, wasn't about the absence of pain. It was about choosing not to let it define your steps anymore. Amelia returned home that afternoon to find her apartment unchanged, yet unfamiliar. The scent of lavender still clung to the throw pillows. Her books sat neatly on their shelves. The picture frame of her and Ethan on their 3rd anniversary still stood on the mantel, smiling a lie that time had now exposed. She walked in slowly, not with dread, but with detachment. It felt like walking through a museum of her former life. She didn't rush to clean or rearrange. Instead, she opened the windows, letting the wind sweep through every room, carrying out whatever lingered of who she used to be. She placed the envelope Sandra had given her on the coffee table, then lit a candle, not to mask the air, but to mark a transition. Her phone buzzed again. Ethan. She didn't read the message. She deleted it before her eyes could even register the first word. There was no hate in her anymore. Just closure. The kind you don't need permission for. She took down the anniversary photo, not in anger, but as an act of release, and replaced it with a framed scripture. He mocketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. It felt like truth. Like home. Not the kind built by shared rent and stolen moments, but the kind you build inside yourself when everything else has fallen. She stood in the center of the living room, hands on her hips, and smiled, not because things were perfect, but because she was no longer pretending they had to be. The following morning, as the sun bathed the apartment in gentle gold, Amelia stepped out in a crisp blue dress, hair tied back, lips soft with balm. She wasn't going anywhere grand, just a quiet cafe where she used to write before life swallowed her whole. As she walked through Willow Heights, people greeted her with the warmth of routine. To them, she was still the woman who once loved quietly, who smiled politely. Only she knew what lived beneath that smile now, strength forged in betrayal, grace carved from grief. At the cafe, she ordered tea and a croissant, then sat by the window and pulled out her journal. She scribbled down ideas for a memoir, sketched out a travel plan, and made a list titled Things That Make Me Laugh. By the time she finished, the page was full. Laughter, it turned out, had been hiding in the small corners of her life all along. She closed the journal and whispered a final prayer, not for restoration, but for direction. Order my steps in thy word, and let not any iniquity have dominion over me, she murmured, eyes lifted. As the wind rustled the trees outside, Amelia felt no urge to look back, no ache for what was. Her journey hadn't ended in heartbreak. It had only begun there. And now she walked forward, not wounded, not bitter, but blooming in the quiet strength of a woman who knows she will never be lost again. Life will sometimes test us with betrayals we never saw coming, from the people we trusted most and the places we felt safest. But pain is not the end of your story. It's only a page, not the whole book. When someone breaks your heart, don't rush to patch it up with bitterness or revenge. Sit with the silence. Let God speak in the quiet. Like Amelia, sometimes strength doesn't come from fighting. It comes from walking away, healing, and building again, brick by brick, in peace. If someone lied to you, left you, deceived you, it doesn't mean you are not enough. It means they never knew how to honor what they had. And that's not your burden to carry. What's meant for you will not play hide and seek with your soul. So take your time. Mourn what you must, but don't stay buried in what broke you. Because healing is holy, and wholeness is possible. And when you finally smile again, from your soul, not just your lips, you'll know that you made it through the storm, not bitter, but better. We come before you not with perfect hearts, but with honest ones. For every listener who has been lied to, let your truth cover them like a warm blanket. For every soul that's been wounded by betrayal, pour healing oil into their cracks and make them whole again. Lord, teach us to release what you did not assign, to walk away from what no longer serves our peace, and to find joy not just in laughter, but even in the quiet spaces where we rediscover ourselves. For those still waiting for closure, be their counselor. For those who feel unseen, remind them that you are El Roy, the God who sees. Break the cycle of performing for love, Lord, and teach us to be rooted in the love you freely give. Replace every lie with your truth. Turn every tear into testimony. Make us strong, not just in public, but even in our private places where no one sees but you. Father, we ask for beauty in place of ashes, joy that dances over sorrow, and peace that stays even when the winds blow. For the listener trying to rise again, let them rise. For the one afraid to start over, give them courage. And for the one who feels alone in the rebuilding, remind them that you never left. We receive your healing. Hope you enjoyed this interesting story. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel. See you again in my next story.